The room went quiet when the auditor cleared his throat. Not polite quiet, the kind that makes your skin tighten. My sister sat across the table from me, legs crossed, chin lifted, wearing the same expression she always did when she thought she'd already won. Calm, slightly amused, untouchable. "This won't take long," she'd said earlier, tapping her manicured nails against the conference table. "We're clean." She said we the way people do when they've already decided who's going to take the fall if that turns out not to be true. The auditor adjusted his glasses, eyes down on the stack of papers in front of him. "For the record," he said, "this review covers vendor disbursements over a 36-month period." My sister smiled. I didn't, because tucked inside my bag, hidden beneath old notebooks and a charger I didn't need, was the spreadsheet that made this meeting inevitable. And they didn't know what I had already done. "Before we begin," my sister added casually, "I just want to clarify that I handled vendor payments as part of my role. Everything was approved." Approved. That word always came easily to her. She'd been approving things her whole life. My clothes, my tone, my usefulness. She'd never expected anyone to approve her. The auditor nodded politely. "That's what we're here to confirm." He flipped the first page. The sound of paper moving felt louder than it should have. I watched my sister closely, not her face, but her hands. She'd always told me you could tell when someone was lying by their eyes. She was wrong. Her fingers stilled. "Vendor account 4417, the auditor began. "Transfer dated March 14th. Amount, $18,500. My sister leaned back. "Standard payment." He continued. "April 2nd, $22,000. She shrugged. "Large order. June 9th, $15,750. She exhaled slowly, like this was boring her. Then he paused. Just long enough. "Each of these vendors," he said, "was flagged for review." My sister's smile tightened. "For what reason?" she asked. "For duplication," he replied. The word hung there. Duplication. I felt my heartbeat steady instead of spike. That's when I knew I was ready. 3 months earlier, I'd been alone in the office late. Again, cleaning up a backlog no one else wanted. That was my role. The fixer. The one who stayed quiet and stayed late. That's when I noticed it. Same vendor names. Different account numbers. Same amounts. Different destinations. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. Then I realized it was a pattern. Patterns don't belong to accidents. I didn't accuse. I tracked. Every transfer. Every approval. Every round number payment that looked just reasonable enough to avoid questions. By the time I brought in the auditor, the total had already crossed 6 figures. My sister laughed softly. "You're telling me you think we paid people twice?" The auditor didn't look up. "I'm telling you," he said, "that the funds didn't go to vendors." Her posture shifted. "Not much. Just enough." "Then where did they go?" she asked. He flipped another page. "Private holding accounts," he said, "linked through intermediary entities." My sister's eyes flicked just once toward me. I didn't react, because this wasn't about confrontation. This was about exposure. "And the cumulative total," the auditor continued, voice even, "currently stands at $220,000. The number landed like a drop plate. $220,000. My sister laughed again, but this time it cracked halfway through. "That's absurd," she said. "You're misreading the data." The auditor looked up at her for the first time. "I'm reading it aloud," he replied. Silence swallowed the room. My sister turned to me then, eyes sharp, searching for something, confusion, fear, apology. I gave her none of it, because the reading had only just begun, and every transfer had a date, a time, and her name. My sister leaned forward, palms flat on the table, as if proximity alone could intimidate the numbers into changing. "You're cherry-picking," she said. "Anyone can make data look suspicious if they want." The auditor didn't respond. He simply turned another page. "Vendor account 5129, he said. "Transfer dated July 21st. Amount, $9,800. I felt the air shift. That one mattered, because that was the transfer I'd almost missed. At the time, it had looked harmless, small enough to avoid attention, timed right before a long weekend when approvals piled up and oversight thinned. I nearly closed the file and gone home that night. What stopped me was the memo line.
Rush processing. Sister approved. She'd never added notes. Ever. The auditor continued. This account was registered as a materials supplier. However, funds were routed through an intermediary LLC created 8 days prior to the transfer. My sister rolled her eyes. So, vendors restructure all the time. Yes, the auditor said calmly. But vendors don't usually list a family member as the authorized signatory. Her foot jerked under the table. Just once. I remembered the night I discovered that LLC. How my hands had gone cold as I scrolled through public records, watching her name appear again and again. Director, manager, beneficiary, each title layered just enough apart to look unrelated. I hadn't slept that night. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Next entry, the auditor said. August 3rd. $12,400. My sister cut in sharply. This is ridiculous. Why are we even entertaining this? The CFO cleared his throat. Because internal controls flagged the accounts. She shot him a look. Since when do controls trump trust? That question told everyone everything. The auditor went on. Across 36 months, there are 17 vendors with similar routing patterns. 17. I watched the number sink in. Watched her calculate how many explanations she'd need. How many people she'd have to charm, bully, or exhaust to make this go away. She leaned back, crossing her arms. You're assuming intent. I'm documenting repetition, he replied. Intent is inferred. She laughed. Brittle. You think I'd risk my job for this? The auditor didn't miss a beat. People don't risk what they believe they control. Her eyes snapped to him. What does that mean? She demanded. It means, he said, that every transfer required your approval code. He looked down again. And your credentials were used. The room stayed silent. I felt something strange then. Not satisfaction, not anger. Relief. Because for so long, I'd been the only one who saw the pattern. The only one who felt the weight of knowing something was wrong and being told I was overthinking it. Now the pattern had a voice. And it wasn't mine. My sister turned toward me slowly, suspicion finally sharpening into something closer to accusation. You did this, she said. I met her gaze. You signed it, I replied. Her mouth opened, then closed again. What I didn't realize then, I thought, watching her scramble internally, was how much she'd relied on my silence to keep her confident. The auditor reached the final page. Would you like me to continue reading each transfer aloud? He asked. My sister swallowed. No, she said quickly. This has gone far enough. The CFO glanced at the auditor, then at me. We need the full record, he said. The auditor nodded. Very well. He resumed. Dates. Amounts. Entities. Each one peeled away another layer of her certainty. By the time he finished, the total sat there, unchanged. $220,000. My sister stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. This is a witch hunt, she snapped. You're humiliating me. The auditor looked up again, expression neutral. I'm auditing, he said. Humiliation isn't a metric. She turned to me, eyes blazing. You could have come to me. I held her gaze, steady. I did, I said quietly. You told me to mind my place. Her face went pale. Because she remembered that conversation. And she remembered laughing. The auditor gathered his papers. This concludes the preliminary reading, he said. Next steps will involve recovery assessment. Recovery. The word landed heavy. My sister sank back into her chair, suddenly smaller. And I realized something important. She wasn't afraid of the numbers. She was afraid of what came after they were spoken aloud. Because once the money has a voice, it doesn't go quiet again. And the next meeting wouldn't be about if. It would be about how. The meeting adjourned without resolution. That alone unsettled my sister more than the numbers ever could. She lingered in the hallway, phone already pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent as she paced. I caught fragments as I passed. Audit overreach. They don't understand vendor relationships. Just a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings don't usually come with spreadsheets. By the next morning, my inbox was full. Not from her. From people she hadn't expected to talk. Legal. Compliance. ID. Requests, not accusations. That was the dangerous part. They weren't asking if something was wrong. They were asking how far back. The IT director called me directly. We're preserving all communications related to vendor onboarding, he said. Standard protocol. Standard. Another word people use when they want you not to panic. My sister did panic. She showed up at my desk just after lunch, eyes sharp, voice controlled to the edge of breaking. You went behind my back, she said. I didn't look up from my screen. You went around everyone's. She lowered her voice. You think this ends with me? I think it ends with the truth, I replied. She scoffed. You always did love playing righteous. I finally looked at her. No, I said. I loved believing you. That landed harder than any accusation. She turned away first. That afternoon, compliance uncovered the emails. Not because she'd kept them neatly. Because she'd assumed no one would ever read them. Vendor setup requests sent from her account. Approval chains bypassed. Instructions phrased carefully enough to look procedural, until you saw them side by side. One email stopped me cold. Route through secondary entity. Cleaner. Cleaner. I felt something in my chest settle. Not anger, not shock. Confirmation. The auditor called another meeting. This time, my sister wasn't smiling. She sat rigid, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. We've reviewed internal communications, the auditor said. And I'll be adding these to the record. My sister leaned forward. Those emails are being taken out of context. Context increases clarity, he replied. It doesn't reduce it. He began reading. Subject lines. Dates. Phrases she'd used over and over. She closed her eyes once, just briefly, like someone bracing for impact. The CFO interrupted. Why wasn't this disclosed earlier? My sister snapped her eyes open. Because it wasn't required. The auditor tilted his head. It was. Silence. I watched something shift in the room, not toward blame, but toward inevitability. When people realize the system is no longer protecting them, they stop performing and start bargaining. My sister turned to me then, voice low. Fix this, she whispered. You owe me. I stared at her, stunned, not by the audacity, but by the assumption. I don't owe you silence, I said. Her face twisted. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm surviving it. The auditor closed his folder. Based on findings to date, he said, this matter will be escalated. Escalated. The word echoed louder than the amounts. My sister stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said. You'll regret it. I thought of the nights I'd stared at spreadsheets alone. Of the doubt. The fear of being wrong. I already did, I said. For a long time. She stormed out. The room stayed silent. Then the CFO exhaled slowly. This is going to get ugly, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. But it was already ugly. We just weren't looking. As the meeting ended, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. The money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how carefully she'd planned it. And planning leaves trails. The next phase wouldn't be about accounting. It would be about intent. The phrase escalated review sounded clinical. Harmless. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, the conference room changed. More chairs. More folders. More people who didn't smile. Legal joined compliance. Compliance brought outside counsel. Outside counsel brought questions no one could joke their way around. My sister arrived late. Again. But this time, she didn't make excuses. She sat down without looking at anyone, eyes fixed on the table like it might open and swallow her whole. The lead investigator introduced herself and got straight to it. This review is no longer limited to accounting discrepancies, she said. We're examining intent and personal benefit. Personal benefit. I felt my sister's breath hitch. The investigator continued. We'll begin by tracing the destination accounts. The screen lit up behind her. Boxes. Arrows. Names. My sister's name appeared more times than anyone else's. She shifted in her seat. That doesn't prove anything, she said. I manage vendors. Of course my name is there. The investigator nodded. Which is why we followed the money past the vendors. A new slide appeared. Private accounts. Shell entities. Short-lived LLCs with no employees and no purpose beyond moving funds. One of them carried a familiar address. My sister's apartment. Her head snapped up. That's a coincidence. The investigator didn't argue. She zoomed in. This entity was formed 12 days before the first irregular transfer, she said. It closed 9 months later. She clicked again. All funds routed through it originated from vendor payments you approved. Silence crushed the room. My sister laughed weakly. You're saying I planned this? The investigator met her eyes. I'm saying it was designed. Designed. That was the word that finally broke her composure. You think I'm some kind of criminal? My sister snapped. I've worked here for 10 years. The investigator didn't flinch. 10 years is a long time to learn how systems work, she said. I felt a chill move through me. Because that was the truth I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't impulsive. It was practiced. The investigator turned another page. Let's talk about timing, she said. Transfers spike during audit downtimes. End of quarters. Holiday weeks. My sister stared at the screen, jaw clenched. You memorized the blind spots, the investigator said calmly. The CFO rubbed his forehead. This isn't good, he muttered. My sister turned to me then, eyes blazing with something close to desperation. You told them, she accused. I shook my head. I didn't have to, I said. The system did. Her voice dropped. We're family. The investigator interrupted gently but firmly. Family relationships don't exempt fiduciary duty. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. My sister slumped back in her chair. For the first time, she didn't argue. She didn't deny. She just stared at the floor. What happens now? She asked quietly. The investigator folded her hands. Now, she said, we determine recovery options and disciplinary action. Disciplinary action. I felt my stomach tighten, not with pity, but with inevitability. Because once intent is documented, consequences stop being negotiable. As the meeting adjourned, my sister lingered behind. She waited until the room emptied. Then she looked at me. You always were watching, she said bitterly. I met her gaze. I was trying to understand, I replied. There's a difference. She shook her head slowly. You're going to ruin me. I thought about that. About how often she'd dismissed my concerns. How often she'd laughed when I hesitated. No, I said. You did this. I just refused to carry it. She turned away without another word. And as I watched her walk down the hallway, something settled heavy in my chest. This was no longer about exposure. It was about consequences. And the next meeting wouldn't involve spreadsheets or emails. It would involve decisions no one could undo. The decision meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. That timing wasn't accidental. By then, the week's noise had settled. Emails had stopped flying. Everyone involved had read the reports more than once. Opinions had hardened into conclusions. My sister arrived early this time. She sat alone at the far end of the table, shoulders rounded, confidence stripped down to something raw and defensive. The version of her that used to command rooms was gone. What remained was someone calculating survival. The head of legal spoke first. "We've completed the intent analysis," he said. "The conclusion is clear." My sister's fingers tightened around a paper cup. "The transfers totaling $220,000 were deliberate," he continued. "Structured to avoid detection. Personally beneficial. Personally beneficial." My sister exhaled through her nose, eyes closed. "This could have been handled internally," she said. Quietly. The CFO looked at her. "It was. Until it couldn't be." The head of legal slid a document across the table. "This outlines proposed action," he said. "Termination for cause. Restitution. Referral to external authorities if repayment terms are violated." Termination. The word sat there like a final punctuation mark. My sister opened her eyes slowly. "You're firing me," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Just yes. No qualifiers. No apology." Her gaze snapped to me. "You wanted this," she said, voice shaking. "Don't pretend you didn't." I held her eyes, steady. "I wanted it to stop," I said. "You wanted it to continue." The distinction mattered. She laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you better?" "No," I said. "It makes me honest." The CFO cleared his throat. "We also need to discuss recovery," he said. "The company expects full repayment." My sister's head dropped. "I don't have it all," she whispered. The head of legal nodded. "Which is why repayment will be structured. Monitored." Monitored. That word terrified her more than termination. Because monitoring meant no more shadows. No more blind spots. She looked around the table, searching for sympathy. She found professionalism instead. "This isn't personal," the CFO said quietly. "It's necessary." My sister stood abruptly, chair scraping loud in the silence. "You're all acting like I planned to hurt someone," she snapped. The head of legal didn't raise his voice. "You planned to take money that wasn't yours," he said. "Impact follows intent." She turned to me one last time. "You could have protected me," she said. I thought about all the times I'd protected her image by staying quiet. All the times I'd cleaned up after her without being asked. "I protected the truth," I replied. "You just weren't on the same side of it." She shook her head slowly, disbelief mixing with something close to grief. "This will follow me forever," she said. "Yes," I said softly. So did my silence. The meeting ended without ceremony. No one shook hands. No one lingered. As my sister walked out, escorted by HR, I felt something heavy lift and something heavier replace it. Not triumph. Responsibility. Because when wrongdoing ends, someone still has to live with what comes next. And for me, the hardest part wasn't exposing her. It was accepting that consequences don't heal relationships. They just clarify them. And the final chapter, the one no spreadsheet could predict, was still ahead. HR didn't make a scene. That was almost crueler. They walked my sister to the elevator quietly, one person on either side like bookends holding up something that had already fallen. No raised voices. No final warnings. Just a badge collected, a laptop bag handed over, and the soft ding of doors closing. I watched from the end of the hallway. She didn't look back. For the rest of the day, the office moved strangely, too normal, like a body continuing its routines after a wound it hadn't learned to feel yet. Emails went out. Meetings happened. Someone laughed in the break room. At 4:56 p.m., a company-wide notice landed in everyone's inbox. Effective immediately. Name is no longer with the organization. No explanation. No summary. Just absence. I sat at my desk long after most people left, staring at my screen without seeing it. I'd imagined this moment for months, what it would feel like when the truth finally caught up with her. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. That evening, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you say about me?" she asked immediately, voice sharp, brittle. "I didn't say anything," I replied. She laughed. "Hi, unsteady. They don't just fire someone for nothing." "They didn't," I said. "They fired you for something you did." Silence. Then her voice dropped. "You watched," she said. "All that time you watched." I leaned back in my chair, the office dark around me now. "I noticed," I said. "You assumed I wouldn't understand." "You assumed wrong," she snapped. "No," I said. "I assumed you'd stop." That was the part she couldn't forgive. "You could have warned me," she said. "You could have given me time to fix it." I closed my eyes. "I did," I said. "You told me I was paranoid." She exhaled sharply. "So that's it. You just let them ruin me." "They didn't ruin you," I said. "They documented you." She went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was different. Smaller. "They're making me pay it back," she said. "Yes. And if I don't, they escalate," I finished. A shaky breath came through the line. "I never thought it would go this far," she whispered. I thought of all the careful steps she'd taken, the blind spots she'd memorized, the emails she'd never deleted because she didn't think she'd need to. "You planned for it to go far," I said gently. "Just not for it to end." She swallowed hard. "You always did think you were better than me," she said. "That old accusation." I didn't rush to deny it. "I thought you were safe," I said. "There's a difference." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next week was quieter. Too quiet. Legal finalized repayment terms. Finance adjusted controls. Compliance issued a memo about reporting concerns early. Anonymous, protected. People started stopping by my desk. Not to gossip. To thank me. "I didn't know how to say something," one person admitted. "I thought I was imagining things," said another. Each conversation left me heavier. Because speaking up doesn't just end one problem. It reveals how many people were holding their breath. On Friday afternoon, the auditor emailed his final report. Funds accounted for. Recovery initiated. Case closed internally. Internally. I knew that didn't mean over. It meant documented. That night, as I was packing up to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe now?" I stared at the screen, heart steady. Because safety had never been the point. Truth had been. And once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop at termination letters. It keeps going. Into places no one can control. The message didn't scare me. That surprised me. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Threats lose their power when they arrive too late, after the truth has already settled into place. The final recovery statement came 2 weeks later. Every dollar accounted for. Payment schedule locked. External escalation avoided, for now. $220,000 didn't disappear anymore. It had an address. A trail. A future. My sister moved out of her apartment not long after that. I heard through a cousin. A smaller place. Cheaper. Temporary. People always say consequences teach lessons. I don't know if they do. What they do is clarify reality. At work, controls tightened. Oversight became routine instead of reactive. People asked questions sooner. Spoke quieter, but more honestly. And something else changed. People stopped assuming silence meant ignorance. One afternoon, the CFO stopped by my desk. "You handled this correctly," he said. "Not many people would have." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. Because what I handled wasn't just fraud. It was loyalty. The kind that teaches you to doubt your own eyes to protect someone else's comfort. My sister and I haven't spoken since that call. Not out of anger. Out of understanding. There are some truths relationships don't survive. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them real. Sometimes I replay that first meeting in my head, the moment the auditor cleared his throat and started reading. How the room had changed. How confidence drained as facts took the microphone. Reading is powerful. Because it takes what was hidden and gives it a voice that doesn't ask permission. My sister thought she'd buried $220,000 in vendor accounts. She didn't count on someone listening long enough to hear the pattern. I didn't expose her. I stopped pretending not to notice. And that made all the difference. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.